Hello and welcome to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. My name is Nils Vinje, and today my guest is Sarah E. Brown. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Nils, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm looking forward to digging into all things leadership with you, Sarah. But first, would you share with us the role that you're in and the company that you work for today?
Absolutely. So I work for a company called Sastrify, the automated procurement solution in the SaaS space, and I'm the VP of marketing, and also the author of the book Lead Upwards, which I think we're going to talk a little bit about today.
We're gonna get. I have a copy of the book right here. Lead Upwards is amazing. It's wonderful. We're gonna dig into this deep, but just give me a little bit of context on the Sastrify. And you said, tell me about the procurement angle again.
Sure. So every company now has to buy SaaS, and It's wildly complicated. And as a company grows, what Sastrify does is helps every company with both their procurement, so acquiring new software, but also how to manage their renewals, how to think through their contracts, how to make sure they're not overpaying on usage. And we've been wildly successful helping companies of all sizes really get a handle on their stacks. It's been a really fun journey. I've been with them about 10 months now and really excited, especially as we're going to market in the US.
That's exciting. And I mean, just the amount of SaaS products that exist, one, is gigantic. But the amount of SaaS products that every company uses and subscribes to, whether they buy one license or 10, and all of a sudden you get a small company growing to a bigger and growing to a bigger, and you got hundreds of licenses to keep track of. And that's what Sastrify makes sense out of. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And it's really interesting looking at what you think is your SaaS stack, and then you get the true information from the accounting department. That's always a fun insight. And jokes aside, all of us are feeling sort of the economic climate we're in and the importance of running an efficient business. And so it makes us really happy to be ROI positive for all of our customers and being able to deliver some pretty significant savings to folks, as well as all of that management getting time back. These are things that we hear are just incredibly valuable in our market. So happy to be here.
ROI positive for every one of your clients. Those words don't come out and always happen, but that is absolutely wonderful. You can tie your direct investment to the return and poof, Sastrify does it. All right, wonderful.
I will say we have an awesome customer success team, and it's a great thing to be able to deliver that. I know a lot of customer success folks listen to this as well.
100%. Yeah, that's and if you're hiring, check out Sastrify for sure, because they're making big roads in the US. All right, so we're talking all about Lead Upwards today, a big focus on your book. Just came out not too long ago, and thank you again also for the opportunity to contribute to your book. You interviewed me and included some of our excerpts from our conversation in there. So let's set the kind of the baseline of who is this book really for?
So the truth is it's written for me several years ago. And I think many authors will tell you that what it is that sort of keeps you going back to the desk day after day for multiple years, writing, rewriting, is a desire to help. And the first sort of target persona was myself several years ago. I was frustrated at the dearth of resources for startup joiners who wanted to grow their leadership careers, inspired so much by wonderful startup books aimed at founders and helping founders be better at starting companies. But it wasn't until I had my first executive role and, most importantly, my first executive coach that I learned there was a whole other world out there of leadership in the startup world. And really, I felt there wasn't enough guidance. There weren't templates. And so I was really motivated. And I think what got the Wiley team on board, just fantastic to work with them, was this vision of helping startup joiners create some sort of a nonlinear path to the careers that they wanted, regardless of their title.
Okay, so let's come back to before you several years ago, before writing this book. So you joined startups, you worked inside of Starbucks, but when you got into your first executive role, you said you hired an executive coach. Tell me, what was the driver for why you did that? A lot of times people think, oh, well, we're supposed to figure it out, right? This is a startup. We just do things and then we learn from each other. We're all collaborate and whatnot. But you went outside the organization, hired a coach. Tell us a little bit about the decision behind that and what ultimately happened.
Great question. So taking a step back, I think a lot of people get into startup leadership by accident. They're
Yes.
really great at what they do, and someone says, "Hey, why don't you lead a team?" And then that sort of snowballs from there.
I
And
think you just described almost every other guest we've had on the podcast in the similar trajectory. Okay, cool, 100%,
not
100%.
uncommon. And I will say too that we've also noticed in the startup world, there's a lot of sort of nebulous titles of leadership. Leadership isn't necessarily clearly defined until the executive level. And so what happened in my case and what we saw with, I think we've seen across the board and in many different startups is this head of title. Someone is given the charge of the department. They might be leveled over one day. That's not necessarily something that's determined upon the hire. And so I was hired as a head of marketing, and I sat down with my CEO and I said, "Look, I don't want you to hire a VP or a CMO over me. I'd like to really own this role." This was for my first executive role. And I said, "I'd like to earn that VP title." And my CEO, to his credit at the time, said, "Great." And I said, "How do we get me there?" And he said, "Well, we probably will want to get you a coach." And so I think that was a mutual investment. And I think what's so powerful, hopefully, about this book, about courses like yours, Nils, is that we're starting to see leadership becoming more accessible to more people. And again, regardless of level, you can sort of start that journey. And so I had proactively said, "Hey, I don't want you to hire over me. I'd like to earn it. And hey, there's this set of knowledge I know I need to learn." I do think in terms of the sort of figuring it out, there's a lot of that, right? There's even with a great coach, and I worked with a coach for multiple years in that role. There's things that you just won't know how to do until you do them. It's great to have a community. It's great to lean on professional organizations. Hopefully read a book like Lead Upwards and get some feedback from experts like Nils who are featured in it. But I think the whole winging it approach, I can't imagine doing that. That seems really hard. So if someone has done that successfully, feel free to let us know. Maybe we'll update the next edition.
Well, that's the interesting thing. And that has been a common thing across all the other guests on the B2B Leadership Podcast as well, is when I ask about how did you navigate, either getting into your first leadership position or elevating through the ranks from manager to director to VP to C-level, whatever. And the resounding number one answer is, well, I figured it out. And the interesting thing, the hindsight always being 2020, right? Every single one of them also says, I could have saved a tremendous amount of time, could have saved a tremendous amount of relationships if I had just known all these things that I know now, which I could have gotten by going through a program or going through working with a coach or something like that. But there's this stigma with that. It exists out there in the world that, like, oh, I've been told many times, like, I'm a leadership coach, customer success consultant, and I've had the recipe for what someone needed to do because I've been in the role and I've done it and laid it out clear as day right in front of them. And they really are excited. And then they take it to their leadership and they say, I want to hire Nils. And the leadership turns around and says, that's what we hired you to figure out. It's your job. And I'm like, you just wasted 6 months because we could have gotten there next month as opposed to in 6 or 12 months down the line. So what advice do you have for people who are thinking about either getting into their first leadership position or elevating their leadership position from manager to director, director to VP when it comes to taking the fast track? Is coaching the right way? Is it finding somebody else out there? Is it looking for somebody who's done it before? Like, what is your recipe for how to accelerate your leadership career?
I love that. That's a great question. So the first thing is I would question, why do you want to be in leadership? What is it you're hoping to accomplish?
Mm-hmm.
What does leadership mean to you? And I think getting a certain title or leveling, while I'm not going to cast aspersions on anyone's particular career goal, I think there needs to be a little bit more behind that than sort of just this checkbox on your resume. You can earn a fantastic salary. You can have a very meaningful career as an individual contributor or as someone who manages a very small remit. If you want to really carry a bigger bag, so to speak, or really thinking about, well, what does that mean? And what are you willing to grow into? And then getting buy-in from your stakeholders, whether that be at a new company, if you're aiming to join a company that's different from where you are now, or potentially do what I did, which is leveling up at the company where you are currently in order to get that first leadership sort of executive role or leadership role. And in terms of the word fast track, that's interesting because I think I think about promotions and I think about responsibility as being inextricably linked. And when you're ready and are able to take on that responsibility, the leadership titles seem to come. And we see that with people who continue to grow with the company. And then there's also company situations where, and to the point of fast track, you may already have a wonderful CFO that you report to, so that CFO slot's not going to be available to you, at least not in the short term. And I think it's important for people to realize: are you more committed to staying where you are at your company? Is that motivating to you, or is there a particular individual career goal where maybe your leadership team? Maybe you've worked there for 9 years and they're just not going to see you in a VP role, and you're going to have to go somewhere else in order and maybe get some coaching along the way in order to be seen at that level. I will say one fast track thing that I include in the book, it's sort of a hack, is doing consulting.
Yes.
And this is something that really surprised me. It sounds like that resonates with you, where I did consulting at the head of or VP of marketing level before I had the job. Yeah. And so I had to learn how to create a budget. I had to learn how to put together various levels of strategy. There were a lot of pieces that I was able to have a client pay me to learn how to do. Of course, I took it upon myself to make sure I did a fantastic job. They wouldn't have paid me if I didn't. But these were things where I had the skills to do them, but I didn't have the opportunity because I wasn't in that role. Yeah. And I think until you've done these activities and you've been given an opportunity to try them out, to take them on, you also can't know if you like it. You can't know if you're interested in it, let alone good at it. So that would be my best advice: is find a fractional leadership opportunity like Bolster, or sometimes, especially early stage startups can't necessarily afford a full-time C-level person, but they could hire you to do something very specific. And if you're willing to roll up your sleeves and do it and maybe get coaching and help on it, that can be a great way to get the skills and experience before you're quote unquote ready. Does that resonate with you, Nils?
100%. Absolutely. And it's fascinating to be on the inside the company world and then to be on the outside the company world. Because when you're a consultant, it's a different game. And you have to show up in a different way. You have to leverage your expertise in a different way because you no longer know how the entire thing works. And this is why I stress so much, and is one of the most important leadership skills that I teach inside the B2B Leaders Academy, is how to build a framework that can support you in sharing your expertise and your deep knowledge without just recounting the steps that you did at your previous company. Because that's the big mistake I see leaders make all the time. Say, well, when they look at their resume or when you have a conversation with them about their skill set and their background, it's a list of tasks. Oh, I set up this campaign. I did this NPS program. I did this onboarding, QBR, whatever program. In the reality, that doesn't mean anything to anybody in that organization because they aren't part of it, right? So we have to take it up to a, way much higher level, the 30 and 50,000 foot view, to be able to talk intelligently about your expertise and your work. And a consulting is the fastest way I've ever found to do that. And I nearly failed flat on my face before I even started consulting because I didn't know how to do this. And I got help from my coach. He was a mentor of mine. I worked for him for 2 years, one of the best marketing people in the Valley. His name's Rand Schulman's, amazing guy. And he spent a half a day with me to build my very first framework. It was called the 4 Ps. You might remember this, Sarah, because we've talked about this many, many years ago, right? People, purpose, process, and platform. My entire world of customer success that I was consulting on at that point in time could be broken down into one of those 4 Ps. And that was the framework that I used to go and help companies build world-class customer success organizations. And I've evolved that framework and now have my 4 pillars of leadership framework that I use inside the B2B Leaders Academy. And I've built frameworks for training programs. I built frameworks for doing conference presentations. And a framework is just a way to take your incredible expertise, but position it in a way that anybody can understand. Because when nobody knows your background or what you do, you got to communicate at a completely different level.
That makes so much sense, Nils. And I will say that I loved the idea that you just talked about zooming out. And then something we talk about in the book is, and Nick Mehta, CEO of Gainsight, gave some really good insights into leaders have to constantly zoom in and out, being at times very tactical with a team, especially in an early stage startup. And of course, at the board level, right, the highest level, sort of speaking in very, very concrete ways that speak to board interests and insights, and then the executive level. And it's a different type of granularity. And I think being able to navigate both the weeds and the details while also being highly strategic, that's a muscle that does not come intuitively for a lot of folks, especially folks who are really successful as individual contributors. I'll give a great example. Samantha McKenna, featured in the book, was VP of sales at a company where she was promoted from the ranks and realized, as she was then helping other leaders kind of level up their careers, people were doing a whole range of activities that were, sort of nice, but not necessarily leadership. So for instance, one person said, well, I organized the team birthdays, so I am ready to be a director. And, she sort of took them aside and said, you're missing quota. Like you need to hit the basics before we. And I think sometimes with leadership, we come into it thinking it's all of these different things. And then you realize actually it's something else. And what does it mean, to your point? What does it mean at this company? And as a consultant coming in, you're forced to be curious and say, tell me about your business. I know nothing. Teach me what I need to know.
That's the mindset. But the fascinating thing is that mindset that makes you successful in a consulting capacity when you literally know nothing and you are forced to only ask questions and be curious can still be applied inside of an organization in any leadership capacity, whether you're an individual contributor, manager, director, VP, whatever, right? Because it's all about being curious and it's all about accepting that you don't have the answers. And when you don't have the answers, hey, the only thing you can do is be curious and ask questions. And if you do that, you will surface an incredible amount of insight and information that you never would have had access to if you just came in, kind of, pounded the chest and said, well, I've done this before at this company, so I'm going to do this again here. And it just never works because the environments are completely different. Now, if you have a framework and you can extract your expertise, your framework, and figure out how all the things that you learned overlay on top of your framework, then you can share your expertise in a way that is unique and specific to them. And that is what is ultimately magical and gets people on board.
I love that.
Okay, so you talked a little bit ago that, for a long time, access to these kinds of things, in the perfect example of what you shared before, the only time you got access to a leadership coach was when you were in a leadership position at an executive level inside of a company. And I've found the exact same thing. And for, 8 of the last 10 plus years, I only served the senior leaders and executives in a one-on-one leadership coaching capacity as well, because it was a very high ticket, high price, one-on-one intimate relationship. It was a lot of fun, but its, ultimate realm of influence was relatively small because there was only so many clients that I could work with, just like the coach that you worked with. So, my approach was to say, all right, if only the executives get access to this stuff, what's on the line? What's the risk? Well, the risk is that the rest of the organization doesn't get access to this stuff. And the people who are closest to the front line, people who work with your customers, work with your teams, do everything day in, day out, don't get anything. There's something wrong here. We're missing something. So that manager and director frontline ranks became a really important focus. And that was who I built the entire B2B Leaders Academy for, just that group of people. They deserve to have access to these strategies that normally only the executives got access to. So I'm curious for your thoughts on the evolution of where we are today from an access to leadership skills and leadership coaching and leadership development, and where we need to go as a startup community, as a business community, as a SaaS community, in order to ensure that we don't, section off parts of the organization, say only you get this extremely special thing, whereas it should be available to everybody because these are things that are going to improve everybody's life.
So I think a few things to unpack there. The first is even just who we anoint to leadership and why do we promote people. And studies show, unfortunately, there's a fairly homogenous group of people who've been promoted to leadership based on potential. And we see that particularly folks from underrepresented groups are often not necessarily promoted based on potential. They're promoted based on having done the job before or potentially having proven that they have all the skills, which is why I love the course you're doing, because you're helping people get the skills and be ready for leadership. There's also an element of you're never ready until you've done it, until you've totally whiffed in a board meeting. You've never whiffed in a board meeting and don't know what it's like to come back from that, speaking from, plenty of experience. And then you get better and then you learn and then you sort of, and we talk about that in the book, some really concrete ways you can go into it, at least a bit more confident. And I think that word confidence is something you and I have talked about a lot with leadership, where if you don't know what you don't know, it's hard to be confident when you sort of understand, look, this is the way the business world works. This is how leadership operates. And by the way, it's not what I think. And I do think one note is we often have a view of leadership that's very skewed. We see how our leaders behave in all hands meetings. We see how they answer email and Slack. We have all of these data points of managers we've had, some good, some less good. But we don't know what it's like to live in their day and what it's like to go through the day full of meetings, or a day full that doesn't have meetings, and be productive. And I think the mindsets, those are things that we don't get access to. And so what I love about your work, and what I think is so important, and sort of to your question about where are we now, is I think there's more and more discussion and more transparency around accountability for leaders to provide an experience for their teams that is one where people want to come to work or return to work. And there's also an expectation that leaders will provide some sort of a servant leadership model in some form. At the same time, companies are being squeezed. There's more pressure to deliver. So leaders, I think, are in some ways are under more pressure to develop true leaders under them, because there's no time to micromanage. There must be delegation. And so I would say to any leaders thinking of, hiring Nils, or you doing your program for directors or managers, or let's say getting them a copy of Lead Upwards, is you can't afford not to your point, invest in your next line of leaders, because if you're not, you're doing that work for them. And that's you'll burn out, right? So I think today's organizations are missing a huge opportunity if they're not cultivating the next generation of talent. And it's, yes, there's, we see in the news layoffs, we see different ways in which companies have had to tighten their belts, but there's still a lot of competition for top talent. And so I'd say companies that are able to create that top talent from within and motivate people to stay and be bought in already to the mission, that's a huge return on investment.
Agree, 100%. And what I found is that and be curious for your take on this, it usually comes down to a matter of time. Organizations today do not have the time to build and run a structured leadership development program inside their organization for really anybody across the board, but in particular the frontline leaders, right? They would all probably tell me, yeah, that's totally warranted. Sarah, everything you just said makes 100% sense, but we don't have the time to build this, right? But there are solutions out there like the B2B Leaders Academy, like getting started with your book, that offer an opportunity to take a step in that direction. And I think it's on every organization to become aware and stand behind the fact of what they always say, which people are the most important thing. But the amount of companies who actually believe that and put the dollars behind it and really make that true, aside from just saying it, is relatively small. And I think that has to evolve in order for organizations to take advantage of good and bad economic environments, right? I'm curious for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've tended to work for companies that have a dedicated learning and development budget that has a lot of flexibility involved, really trusting team members to use it wisely. Currently, this is the case. At previous companies, it's been the case. And I'm really proud of that. I think that's a values question. And so something I would advise for people who are listening to this, who are thinking about maybe their next career move, or whether they're excited about their current opportunity, is, does your company actively invest in your learning and growth? Are they willing to make the investment in you? And also, are you willing to make the investment in you? Those things have to, of course, go together. And if the answer is yes to both, you're in a great place. I mean, theoretically, that to me is such a great, healthy sign of a culture willing to invest. And I also think not everyone wants to grow in the same ways. And it's important to ask yourself, do I want to just get really good at time management so I can be the best IC CSM? Or do I really want to manage a team of CSMs? It's not going to wake me up in the morning and be like coffee.
Right. And those are wonderful questions. And I have seen a shift in organizations over the last several years where there is an appreciation of individual contributor level promotion, not leadership, right? Where the senior people on the IC side are able to continue to progress their career. They're able to continue to get promotions, get increases in compensation, but stay at an individual contributor level because they solve a very specific problem, or they become an expert in a particular area, or they are just so darn good at their job and that's all they want to do. And that's totally fine, right? But the organization has to support it. So I have seen that evolution, which has been really good. And I champion that 100% because leadership is not number one, is not for everybody. And number two, it is not the only way to progress in your career. You do not, just to feel like you're moving up in your career, you not need to start running teams. That's okay, right? But you got to find an organization that also believes that as well. So a quick question on, thinking about where the individuals who are listening to this now, let's say they get a copy of Lead Upwards. Let's say they're in one of the frontline positions, manager and director level. And there's this element that you talked about before about is the company willing to invest, and is the individual willing to invest? And I'm curious for your take on the individual's role in the growth and development of their leadership skills, because it comes in multiple different flavors that I've seen across the board. There's a small percentage of exceptional high performers who will take control and go to town and do whatever it takes in order to get what they want. They're very clear, and then they enlist the help of others to get it done. There's a large chunk of people who will wait for the organization to send them to some program or sign them up for something and invest in them, and then they will go do it probably. And then there's a small percentage of people on the other end who probably won't engage in anything anyways, because they're highly likely not in the right fit job anyways. So I'm curious for your perspective on the role of the individual in this piece and its balance with the company's perspective, because they're two very different sides and different points of view.
Well, we've just spent quite a bit of time talking about why companies should invest, right? What is the motivation? What, better ROI on talent. If people are going to stay, you might as well have them be really good at their jobs and productive and growing and potentially promotable from within. Those are all things we've talked about from the company side. So taking the other side, well, why leadership, or why developing your skills? What's the motivation for you as an individual? And to your point, there's always going to be a percentage of folks where there's some sort of mismatch, or it's not the right fit, or growth isn't necessarily something that's maybe a priority right now. And for other folks, I think staying where you are is certainly a viable option. There is nothing wrong with, I've got a remit. I want to do it. I want to do it at every company I'm at. If that works for you, and if you're able to make that sustainable, I have questions about the longevity of that type of a career, particularly in fields like high tech. But if you're sort of willing to stay within a pretty small field or a small area, there, great. However, if you want to try new things, if you want to grow, if you feel like your career hasn't reached the levels that meet your individual goals for your life, right? Taking a step back. What are your values around, creating a certain lifestyle for your family, or creating having more control over your day or more control over your time? And I think one of the biggest, sort of most exciting things about leadership is not so much, hey, I get to run a team of people. Actually, that's one of the hard parts, right? Like people are hard, even when they're wonderful, especially when they're wonderful. Then you're even more bought into making sure that the team runs really smoothly, or as smoothly as possible. However, one of the biggest benefits is more control, and more control over your time, control over your impact, being able to give yourself more optionality. And so for many of us, particularly in this hybrid remote economy, there are a lot of things we can't control, right? But what we can control is how we show up every day at work, what we're able to accomplish. And I know that a lot of your work, I've seen you speak at Pulse and other conferences talking about time management. I think going from reactive, things are happening to me, to things are happening by me and through me, and I'm able to actually have quite a lot of agency in my work life, but also extended to my life in general. These are things that being in leadership positions gives you a chance to do. And I will say, the higher up you get in leadership, you do have more flexibility and control over things at that level. You can set the tone on your teams. I'm really excited to work on cultures within the teams that align with my personal values. Things like unplugging after work, making sure people really take their PTO. These are things that inspired me when I had managers who encouraged that, but it starts at the top. So you get to really set the tone. And if that excites you, if that inspires you, hey, I want to create a better lifestyle and actually help improve my team's lives. I want people to feel when they come to work that they have more agency, more control. Does that resonate with you as well?
100%. That's it, right? The ability to impact other people's lives. And when you're in a leadership position, again, whatever level and size company and team and whatever you work with, but you have the greatest potential to impact someone else's life. And I can prove this very quickly for anybody who ever listens to this. Think about the absolute worst boss you ever worked for, right? Think about how you felt that entire time in your life, how the relationships that you had outside of work were impacted by how you felt because of that particular boss. We've all been there. I've had horrendous ones. I'm sure you have too, Sarah, right? And it is amazing how much of your life will be directly impacted by the person that you work for. And so in looking at this from an impact perspective, if that is inspiring to, one, never create that environment for somebody else like it was done to you, that's a good sign. And number two, the fact that you have the opportunity to have the exact opposite level of impact on somebody else's life on the positive side. And if you do the things like Sarah was just talking about, she does with her team, and that I've done with my team and my clients have done with their teams, right? You have the ability to positively impact other people's lives. And that is the absolute greatest feeling for someone who is aligned with leadership and does want to do this. There's nothing better than knowing that you fundamentally shifted somebody else's life. And we're going to spend the most amount of our time in our lives waking while we're awake, working and working with the people that we work with. So if you think about all that time and you think about all that impact, like, it's amazing the transformation that can happen. And sometimes not everybody sees it that way. And that's a big part of, reinforcing some of the things you just mentioned there, Sarah. And you won't be surprised by my favorite saying around this topic, which is every single individual is CEO of his or her career or their career, right? You are the CEO of your career. You're the only person who can make the choice on what's right for you. Nobody else can make the call. And this is different than it has been in the past in our working world. And, Sarah, I'd be curious for your thoughts on, with your deep experience in the startup world, right? How big of a role does that mindset of being the CEO of your career really play? And how has it played out for you getting to this, the level that you're at, writing this incredible book with Wiley, all the wonderful opportunities that you've had?
Well, thank you. I feel very early on my journey in many ways, and I'm very much a student, and I feel humble. And one of the reasons writing books excites me is the chance to get to have conversations like this. So to me, this feels like a sort of pinch me moment, getting to have these conversations, getting to engage other people and really broaden the dialogue about leadership, who gets to be a leader, what leadership requires, and how we can grow into leadership. So for me in my career, I've chosen learning and growth as my North Stars, as well as I would say inclusion. So companies where we have a lot of diversity, both in nationality and ethnicity and background orientation. And I think regardless of what it is that motivates you in your leadership journey or in your career, I think knowing what that is and owning it and sort of solving for that is something I would encourage everyone to do. My values and what has motivated me is going to be different for someone else. One thing I will note with my career is I fell in love with B2B SaaS. And I think early saw the promise of the subscription economy as a really fascinating, interesting career. And I know customer success is predicated on this. And as a marketer, was really interested in figuring out how to be successful within the space. And so I've spent my career in the space, and I've found different parts of it that excite me. And I tend to tackle problems in the startups I joined that are about empowerment. At a previous company was focused on seller empowerment in the cloud space. So how to help cloud sellers really understand their 7 million plus buyers. Now I'm on the other side, helping buyers figure out how to be empowered when they're navigating vendors and all the complications of SaaS contracts. So I've tended to really, I'd say, go in with some sort of a thesis or hypothesis of, hey, there's some sort of empowerment here. And I've worked at a few companies where the job was great. I did well, built pipeline, things like that, but I wasn't as motivated by the customers. And I talk about this in the book where I liked the team. I liked what we were doing. I felt I was contributing value, but my heart wasn't in it. I felt a little disconnected from the target market. So for me, I would say another piece is really caring about customers. If I don't care about them and solving their problems, I'm probably not going to do, I might do an okay job, but not going to be as motivated to do my best work. So those are things I look for. And of course, I look for, I currently work for a European SaaS company that is going to market in the US. I love that we're 23 plus countries. I get to learn something new from colleagues every day, and very jealous of their awesome backgrounds, very cool furniture in Europe. We really need to up our game on the West Coast of the US.
I agree, 100%. That's awesome. That's awesome, and it's fascinating. Getting into the positions that you've been in, having seen the things that you've seen, doing, running marketing for all these different organizations, all these different ways. And I really love that you highlighted the importance of the customer, the importance of the problem that the company solves. Because from a leadership perspective, it's really hard to fake interest in your solution, right? And just like you said, like in that time, you were a little bit detached from the organization. It wasn't that you didn't like the people, it wasn't that you didn't like the product, but the industry just didn't cut it. And I've been in the similar situation. I was VP of CS one time for an organization where I wasn't really that passionate about it. And it was a totally different approach from a leadership perspective, because I had to do a lot more to get myself into the moment to help support the growth and development of the people who were doing nothing but working on the problem that we solved. And it's fascinating. So it's another one of those, interesting angles nobody will ever tell you about until you get into it and you see that, wow, this looked like an incredible opportunity. I joined this company, and then I found out that I just honestly really don't care much for the industry that we serve. And that is a night and day difference than when you're joining a different company and you are deeply passionate about the success of the customers because you feel so intimately connected to them. And I got to say, just as you echoed, leadership is a whole lot easier in the latter case where you are passionate. So if you're not passionate about the solution, you can absolutely 100% be passionate about leadership for sure, right? You need to be, period. But your chance for, fulfillment and growth and just all the good things that are going to happen in your career is probably going to come from having a better alignment with the ultimate organization and solution. Would you agree?
That makes total sense to me. Alignment with the organization, alignment with the solution. There's product market fit, and then there's product you fit. Are you stoked about it? And certainly there's periods of time when we all go through troughs. One thing I'll note, this is a piece of advice that did make it into the book. There are so many things that are unique at each startup that you don't realize until you go to a different one. So if you've worked at one startup your whole career, or maybe a couple, everything kind of becomes its own, almost like a kingdom or a fiefdom. And a lot of it stems from the leadership team. And I say this as someone now on the leadership team where I realize, hey, that decision we're making, it's going to really impact people. And we're the ones in the room making it. So if something feels like it's I don't know if I like startups, maybe it's the pace, maybe it's the degree of ownership. Those are things that you'll probably find that are endemic to all startups. But if there's things like, man, I really don't like that at every startup they serve IPAs. Well, actually, there's plenty of startups where they don't serve alcohol at all. It's an example in the book, but a lot of things can seem universal when they're actually really quirky and they happen to be just unique to your company. So I'd say find a culture where you at least feel like you can be there. You can be excited. And if you don't like it, keep looking, because a lot of work cultures are specific to that company. And then you go to another company and they work really differently. Everything from how much time people are spending in meetings, how asynchronous people are. I've also found as a C-level or VP, sort of at the top of the leadership team, yes, you have control, but there's ultimate sort of environments that the board perpetuates. Yeah. So joining a company where there's total alignment, or at least closer alignment, is really important. And I can't stress enough, if you don't like the weather at your current company, sometimes going to a different company can be really radical. And I think, Nils, we've all seen this, where you find someone, they're smart, they're talented, and they just don't perform in a role. And you're like, what is this? And then that person goes to another company. They have an amazing 5-year run. They do amazing things and get promoted. And I've seen this multiple times with people where they would come to a company. I'd see them and sort of watch them flounder, or see someone who didn't seem to have that impressive resume, but then they really flourished in that environment. So I do think, as CEO of your own career, really having a dedication to your own success and knowing, hey, if I, and this is something that made it into the book, everyone deserves to be able to fail. Yes. And no one gets to decide when your startup journey ends. And if you want to be in the startup world, I believe you deserve to be here. There's some role for you. I don't know what that's going to be, but if you feel that you've hit the end and you failed, this role didn't work out, keep going, find a new one. There's many different options out there, and the weather can look quite different at a different company.
Absolutely, 100%. And I'll draw one parallel to what you were just saying. That is a leadership tip, which is to remove the assumptions. Right. Mm-hmm. And there are oftentimes, as human beings, we make assumptions all the time because it's easier to make decisions and our brain process things a certain way when we can make assumptions. Oh, I've seen this before, therefore I know how to react to this, right? I've seen this. Oh, this is a startup. Well, this is what all startups look like. So therefore the next startup I go to is going to look like the same thing. And it's not. And it applies to people too. We make assumptions about people all the time. But as a leader, you must check yourself and check those assumptions and leave them at the door. And again, back to our earlier part of our conversation, be curious. What is the work-life balance here? What is the culture here? What is the board's influence over the company? What is the importance to the individuals on my team? What's important to me? Right? It's always okay to look at those from a completely fresh perspective and never assume that what happened yesterday or what happened in this team or what happened in this department or what happened in this company is going to be the exact same as what's going to happen tomorrow in a different team, in a different department, a different company. Right?
That feels profound. And I think what you're getting at too is not bringing sort of the exact same playbook that you ran at the last company. Market change, different company, different target market potentially. But also, how can you let go of your baggage, right? Like we've all been through stuff, right? There's always things that have happened in the past. And I think how do you, whether working with a therapist or a coach or with a group of peers who are supporting you, kind of say, hey, I don't have to let that define what happens in the future, good or bad. I can, actually, this is something I've noticed with really star performers, and I'll kind of pick on myself here. I was very talented at running a particular program within marketing. And for many years, I was doing this, and I kind of hated it. Like I was great at it, but it was draining me. And I think you can get really pigeonholed into something you're awesome at. And I had a heart-to-heart with myself, and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be known for it. I'd rather have someone else do this, and I would like to do something different. I think having that awareness that, you don't have to be defined by what you were good at in the past. You can find something different. And you can take all of those learnings and bring them with you when you manage a team that's responsible for it.
And they will welcome you with open arms if that's the case. And, one of my favorite pieces about coaching is that we acknowledge the past, but we focus on the future. So it's never about, beating ourselves up or spending time in the past just wallowing and trying to figure out what went wrong. It's just, let's acknowledge it. Let's appreciate where we were, who the person we were was at that point in time when that happened, and appreciate and honor them, but acknowledge that was the past. And no matter how much time, effort, and energy we spend on it, it's not going to change. Instead, let's put all of our energy and focus and attention after we acknowledge on what we want to change and who we want to be and what type of team we want to create, what type of organization we want to create. And that when that comes together from a mindset and a tactical perspective, the sky's the limit.
I have chills. This is awesome.
Awesome.
I love it.
Wonderful. All right, Sarah. So one last question here before we wrap up. You've been on a tremendous journey through your leadership career, working for incredible companies, running departments now. And I want you to think about all that you know now, everything you've gotten from writing this wonderful book, all the experiences. And if you could sit down with your younger self, let's call it early in career, like first job, second job, time frame, and you could give yourself some advice. And you could just sit down, have a conversation with all the wonderful things that you know. What advice would you share with your younger self?
Get equity. That's easy.
That's a great piece of advice.
6 startup exits, and some of them were exciting. Some of them were exciting to me, but the number that were exciting to me is smaller than 6, fewer than 6. And the point is, I think early in your career, especially if you can afford it. And I recognize it's a very complicated topic that I'm boiling down. But if you really believe in your company and you can afford to take on some risk, I think early in your company is a great time to take on a little bit of that risk, because as long as there's some, you're meeting your basic needs, you're able to kind of do that, knowing that it's not a lottery ticket, knowing that you may or may not have that. But I think having my first exit where there was some meaningful outcome, I was like, oh, this is a whole different perspective on what we're doing here. And it brought me closer to understanding the investors and understanding the sort of broader vision of what we were building in the market, and that market mindset, again, enabling me to grow into having opinions about it. So yes, early in career, get equity. And then maybe I would add one more thing, which is invest in your peer network. Mm-hmm. And this is something that we don't talk about enough, which is not just get help from your peers, but invest in them yourself. Actively give to your peer network. People who early in your career are starting with you are going to do amazing things. They're going to become people where you look at their LinkedIn, you think, wow, I can't believe so-and-so is running that fund, or CEO of that company, or director of this program, or hey, they're working in a company that looks really interesting to me. And I think going at it from a perspective of assuming that your peers are going to be wildly successful, of course, hopefully you as well, you're going to want to cultivate and invest in folks early, because people remember the people who helped them early on and who are willing to invest. I certainly remember people who helped me before it was, before I couldn't open any doors, or I didn't think I could open that many doors, and it wasn't transactional, it was genuine. And I think being able to do, 10 to 15% of your time, I mean, that's a lot. I'd say pick what's right for you. To develop others and to give to others, and not necessarily people who you're mentoring, especially when you're early on, but people who are around you. There's always ways to help. And that's been something that has really paid dividends over my career, and something where people who've done that for me, I dedicated the most recent book, to my two of my favorite bosses, three of my favorite bosses. Sorry, Matt, we'll add you to that. Matt Harada, Colleen Blake, and Aaron Rand, right? Wonderful mentors who invested in me. And I gave them a shout out in print. So you never know if someone's going to mention you in their, rap video or book.
Yeah. If you get in one of Nick's videos, that's going to be awesome. He's the only rap video in my channel. And
do it not for the glory, just do it because it's awesome.
Right. Not for the sole purpose of getting a mention sometime, but the altruistic piece. Wonderful advice. Incredible. Sarah, where can people get a copy of Lead Upwards?
Sure. It's available wherever books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You also go to wiley.com and they have it there. And would really love it if people enjoy the book, share it with a friend, write a review. It really does help. And I'm really excited to hear from folks who have read the book, and hopefully it's inspired them somehow on their journey.
Oh, I'm sure. Absolutely. And thank you so much again for the opportunity to contribute and be part of the book. It's been wonderful to talk leadership with you today. So many incredible nuggets of wisdom in your book and in our chat today. Just so thankful for being able to spend some time with you. So, Sarah, and we will connect again. I want to hear about what the next book topic is when you get to that point, but then I'll have to have you come back and we'll do an update on this. How's that sound?
Sounds fantastic. Thank you, Nils. It's always such a pleasure to learn from you, and really excited to connect today.
Thank you, Sarah. Take care.
Okay. Bye.